Life with a Former Beatle. Olivia Harrison speaks for the first time ever about George, their life, and his music.
Sometimes people would say, "Are you a musician?" You say, "Well, I used to be in a band."
Olivia Harrison on George's journey and the songs he left behind. When we come back, the California girl who captured a Beatles heart.
George was very brave, and people don't know that.
Olivia Harrison breaks decades of silence about the life and music of her late husband, George. He was called the quiet Beatle, the gentle giant of pop.
I bids happiness to one and all.
Later in his life, some branded him a recluse, a brilliant yet eccentric musician.
Here comes the sun.
But to her, the real George Harrison wasn't an enigma at all. She was his constant companion, his biggest fan. She was his wife.
He was a person that I had a great connection with, and he also had a great sense of humor, and he was very serious, and he aspired to a higher kind of consciousness, a higher life.
Getting Olivia Harrison to agree to an interview wasn't easy.
Yeah, he is.
After all, this is a woman who spent nearly 3 decades not talking about George, a man who intensely guarded his privacy. Which begs the question, why is she talking now? She says she wants the world to celebrate George's new music and, in turn, celebrate his life.
Now, there's a view. It's gorgeous.
And no place has Harrison's presence felt more strongly than here, Friar Park, the garden-like foothills of his home outside London. This is where the famed rock idol and his wife shared many precious moments together. And now, for the very first time, Olivia opens the gates to their sanctuary of 27 years. This is such a spectacular place, and George absolutely adored it, didn't he?
Yeah, he loved it here. You know, early on, he had to get out of London, and he found a place where he could get away from the crowds, and this was it.
An hour and a half west of London, the 120-room Gothic mansion was built in the late 1800s. On 30 acres of land, it's shrouded in the mist of the Thames Valley. But George felt most at home outside, in the gardens of Friar Park. Now, did George plant all of these?
Yep.
And all of them?
Yeah, I mean, he had help.
We sat down on a typically rainy English afternoon. But as George might have said, it's good for the garden.
You know, it's nature, really, that he loved. And I think he felt closest to God in nature.
The Beatles' apple may have turned sour in 1970, but for George, it was a fresh start. He bought Friar Park, which was a stark contrast to Beatlemania, and a perfect place to ask life's essential questions like, who am I? What am I doing here? And where am I going?
George always said no one had time to ask those questions. And really, that's where he was at, and he felt that from an early age, but because he had commitments, and he had a career, and he was in a band, and he had a lot of songs to write, and still a lot of aspirations to fulfill, you know, he had to continue participating probably longer than he wanted to.
I like the way you say he was in a band. Like, no big deal.
Well, that's, you know.
Is that how he felt about it, in a way?
Yes and no. I mean, sometimes people would say, "Are you a musician?" He'd say, "Well, I used to be in a band."
By 1974, this Beatle was flying solo, professionally and personally. Already divorced from his first wife, model Pattie Boyd, George was about to embark on his very own U.S. tour. That's when he met a 26-year-old named Olivia Arias in Los Angeles. Her grandparents had immigrated from Mexico. Her mother was a seamstress, her father a dry cleaner. As I read about you, I thought a lot about fate and destiny and how you were a nice girl in California working as a secretary in a record company. And all of a sudden, you're here. And I'm sure on several occasions, Olivia, you might have thought, wow, how did this happen?
Wow, didn't he get lucky? That's what I thought.
Is it? Good for you.
Yeah.
4 years after they met, their first and only child, Danny, was born. And while music always filled this young family's home, it wasn't the music you might think. George's morning wake-up calls to Olivia would often be a Mozart concerto, Cab Calloway's bugle call Rag, or Hoagie Carmichael's Stardust. George had an incredible joie de vivre that might belie sort of the image that a lot of people have of him.
He met a lot of people in his life, and the people he wanted to be around usually had the same quality, which was a simplicity. He loved people who would appreciate that ginkgo leaf on the ground and say, wow, look at that.
But George didn't love the press and made no bones about it.
The press are such dummies, generally speaking. I mean, there are some great writers and great articles in papers, and they, in some ways, do a useful job, but the whole thing is just to sell a paper with some stupid sort of headline. My image has come across like I'm some weird old mystical ex-Beatle.
But he really wasn't some weird old mystical ex-Beatle, was he?
Yeah, he was a weirdo. In some ways, yeah. No, he was mystical and he was an ex-Beatle. So if you want to put those together, then you've got yourself a headline. But, I don't think that's a very intelligent way to write about someone. People would say, oh, he's a recluse. He said, I just don't go where all the press is. People say I don't go out. I just don't go where they are.
Stuck inside a cloud.
But even in this film footage Olivia shared, shot just over a year before his death, George himself reveals just how isolated he'd become.
Sometimes I just feel I'm actually on the wrong planet, And I feel great when I'm in my garden, but the moment I go out the gate, I think, what the hell am I doing here?
Still, it wasn't all about privacy. Harrison feared for his personal safety, and as it turned out, with good reason.
It was a terrifying experience. It was nearly a fatal experience.
It was December 1999, around 3 in the morning. While they slept, a 33-year-old schizophrenic broke into Friar Park and viciously attacked them both, stabbing George in the chest as many as 8 times. You might not want to admit it, but you were pretty feisty.
Yeah.
In a desperate attempt to subdue the assailant, Olivia struck the man, first with a fireplace poker, then an antique lamp. You took that lamp and you walloped him over the head with it.
Yeah, George was coaching me, I have to say, and George was very brave, and people don't know that because he'd already been injured, and he had to jump up and bring him down to stop him from attacking me. He saved my life, too.
You saved each other's lives.
Yeah, we did, and that was an interesting experience because, not a lot of people get tested like that, thank God.
George might have escaped that brush with death, but his next test would be his last.
All things must pass.
After a 4-year battle with cancer, George Harrison passed away 1 year ago this Friday. Olivia says he faced death with no fear, no regrets. In a way, it was the tour he'd been rehearsing for nearly all his life. After all, this was the man who, 30 years ago, wrote about the art of dying. While he was sick, how did he deal with that? The fact that here was something happening to his body, ravaging his body, in fact, that he really couldn't control.
He never really, I don't think, felt in control. He gave his life to God a long time ago. He wasn't trying to hang on to anything. He wasn't, he was fine with it. Sure, nobody likes to be ill. Nobody likes to be uncomfortable. But, he went with what was happening. He said, you can't just, at the end of your life, start thinking about God. You have to practice. It's not something you just stumble upon, consciousness and self-realization. You have to work for it.
And he worked on his music till the very end as well, but would not see the completion of Brainwashed, a collection of 11 new songs, all but one written before his illness.
Oh, the rising sun.
So Olivia tapped two uniquely qualified musicians to finish the work, George's good friend and fellow traveling Wilbury, Jeff Lynne, and wouldn't you know, here comes the sun.
It was the happiest and the saddest thing that we've ever had to do. It's such a privilege and an honor to work on a record like this, and so sad that he couldn't be there to do it for us, you know?
He is. Especially me.
Brainwashed may be his swan song, but if you're looking for any prophetic words of wisdom, you'll have to read deep between the lines. His wife of 23 years says George Harrison's songs were about life, not death.
George dedicated a lot of his life to attain a good ending, and I don't have any doubt that he was successful.